Hey everyone, great to see you. Welcome to Get Real. I'm Jim Weiss, and in this episode, I'm speaking with Matthew Zachary. He's a 3-decade survivor of brain cancer. Pretty remarkable, huh? The founder of Stupid Cancer and the host of Out of Patience, one of the longest running healthcare podcasts, which I have one day hoped to emulate. Today, we're sharing our visions for consumer-driven oncology, the potential of at-home pre-cancer detection tests, and much more. My man Matt is on a mission to transform how we talk about and treat cancer. I'm right there with him. Welcome, Matt. Matt, you have a great mission to galvanize conversations about cancer and to normalize what is, one of the more pervasive situations we've seen. There was something that my wife, I guess my wife passed away from cancer New Year's Eve. One of the things she said through the long journey that we were on, or maybe not that long in retrospect, but long enough, that cancer is a gift wrapped in barbed wire. That was something that she often quoted. I know what that means to me, but I'd love to hear how that resonates with you and in your work.
I've heard it described also as the gift I wouldn't give anyone. But first, let me just say my condolences. There's never a good Hallmark card for when this lands on you. Her loss is tragic, and it reverberated in all the meaningful ways that it could.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's the point of cancer being wrapped. It's not a gift that you wouldn't give. It's really, it is one wrapped in barbed wire, but I will say she became a different person after she had it, and I think this is something you might relate to, having survived it. But I think she saw things completely differently pre-cancer, post-cancer in terms of, and I've seen it with a lot of people, but in terms of her empathy and level of engagement and wanting to give back and participate, things she didn't hear before she now heard, things she didn't do before she would do. It was a very different person.
Yep.
Which actually makes it all harder leaving, because she was even a better person than she was even before. She was awesome before. I think that one was sort of how I saw it. But you were diagnosed with terminal brain cancer in adolescence. It's kind of unbelievable sitting here. You've survived. How did that change your path and outlook on life? I mean, tell us a little bit about what was your pre and post experience.
Sure. Well, everything in context, this was 30 years ago. So everything I talk about is, I was diagnosed over an answering machine, first and foremost.
Yeah, wow.
That's a true story.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yep, pretty much.
Given my experiences, yeah.
I was an aspiring musician, concert pianist, film composer, supposed to go to USC for film school, got early admissions, and the summer before my senior year at Binghamton, my left hand stopped arpeggiating. And I thought that was very strange, but I was stupid and 21, so I did the Amadeus where I just switched my hands and no one knew. Then I got some headaches and I got weird and, wasn't taken seriously. And finally, toward the end of the fall semester, I had a seizure and peripheral vision. My eyes kind of went all Marty Feldman on me. Then maybe something's really wrong with this kid. And I had an MRI and they found this massive thing in my skull. So practically my life changed because I couldn't pursue my dreams. 10 years of training in jazz, classical, film studies, ethnomusicology, composition were gone out the window. And plan B became plan A when I just so happened to live and not die, defying their sort of statistical prognostications. Ironically, I got a job at Harrison and Starr as an IT director, but I was able to rebuild my life, but I didn't really have a purpose yet. I was just really callous and apathetic, but that's just how we treated cancer 30 years ago.
I mean, do you know why you survived? I mean, do you have any real idea? Do you ever think about it?
So there's a book in the 80s by Dr. Bernie Siegel called Love, Medicine, and Miracles. Nice Hamishkite, oncology surgeon, kind of lambasted for believing that there's more to life than allopathic medicine to help the body. Ahead of his time, but gave birth to Tony Robbins and Andrew Weil and Wayne Dyer and all these incredible luminaries that we look at now for spiritual understanding of mind body. And I think that's how it is. Love, medicine, miracles. I just got fucking lucky.
Okay. I mean, good to know. It's sometimes better to be lucky than anything. We often don't talk about the importance of luck in even the drug development business or all the things we do. Luck plays some role. And, you got to be capable and meet that moment of luck to fully take advantage of it. I'm going to bring it back to where we started. You're a recorded musical artist, which is cool.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about music as a healing force? I know it's been for me during my wife's journey. I'm lucky to be in Marin County, and there's always a Dead cover band playing. In fact, the Dead cover bands feature Bob Weir and Phil Lesh, who now passed from cancer himself. I'm going Monday night to see Stu Allen at a local venue. I find it so truly healing. What do you think about music in all of this?
Well, as a musician, I had sort of like a unique inside understanding of what it meant to me before I was sick. And how that changed after I was sick was what it meant to me almost spiritually. And I was unable to play for about 6 months after my surgery, having played every single day of my life since I was 12 years old. And it changed the way I think about creating music, thinking about music, resonant frequencies and cluster chords and compositional style and influences. But then it came down to what was I going to listen to that spoke to me as a person. And I recently had one would say overdue, but I would say at the right amount of time, a spiritual awakening. And I've re-embraced hermetic principles and harmonics and frequencies and vibrations and sound. And I have tuning forks that I just listen to and harmonize against. And I think the power of music is N of one. People decide what's important to them. There are certain songs I can't listen to anymore, but there are certain songs I can't not listen to ever again. And I'm still writing music, and I still have songs in my head. And I one day have an aspiration to make my famous third album. That's been waiting since 1999. But art is, you just call it the art of survivorship, which is how you choose to get busy living and what that means to you personally. And it's not a choice. It's forced upon you to rethink what life means. It accelerates you in a way you weren't expecting, especially when you're younger. Having the mindset of an 80-year-old when you're 22 is conflict of interest. Mortality should not be in your mind's eye. You should be jumping off fences, doing stupid things when you're 21 years old. But music and art and creativity and therapy are the cornerstones of humanity. And it's what defines our civilization and our species across all time. That's not a direct answer to your question, but for me, I live and breathe creativity all day, every day. And I hear songs in my head every day. And I use that perfect pitch and that relative pitch, and it kills me. But I could perseverate on various different songs and what it means to me and write music in my head every single day, cursory of my day-to-day experience and my long-term trauma. I didn't find my purpose until I met my first peer. And this is an interesting story, also a 90s story, because I was hit up over a Columbia listserv. Listservs, people, listservs, by a gentleman named Craig Lustig, who had heard me play piano because I had rehabbed a little bit, but I couldn't go to grad school. He heard me give a concert for the American Cancer Society here in New York at a Relay for Life event in like 2000, 2001. Reached out and said, "My name is Craig. I'm a fellow cancer survivor, and I'd love to know you." Little did I realize that Craig Lustig was on the board of directors of a very well-established, highly influential Beltway group called the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship. The oldest survivor-led group in the country, started in 86.
By Ellen Stovall.
By Ellen Stovall, who then became my other mentor.
Who was my babysitter when I was growing up.
Oh my God. Yes, I'm telling you, we're like brothers from another mother at this point. Now, Ellen became my mentor. Craig was, we talk about peer-to-peer, just for the sake of how ironic this was. He ticked like 7 boxes on our first date. He was bald, in his 20s, Jewish, from New York, with brain cancer. He went to Binghamton and was in my a cappella group, and I didn't know him. So upon that moment, I found purpose. And I joined the volunteer advisory group for NCCS. I got introduced to this, everything went Technicolor, like in The Wizard of Oz. And I'm like, where have all of you people been for 7 years? And that was how I started to sort of extradite myself from the agency world and fell into Livestrong's heyday, fell in love with the brand, fell in love with the mission, found a home, gave myself permission to be alive and forgive myself for what I'd done to my family and friends, and built a whole new identity for myself. So that really was when my purpose was born, because I didn't realize I could have one thanks to Ellen Stovall and Craig Lustig.
Well, it's great that we have Ellen in common. You know, she's from a small town like me. It's called Honesdale, Pennsylvania, up in the Poconos, and that is the connector. But we also worked in the early days of Herceptin when I worked at Genentech. So again, I got some experience through my work in telling this story. I actually had an event last night with the Cancer Research Institute. I've been on that board for almost a dozen years. That's focused on immunotherapy for cancer and has been around for a long time and played an instrumental role in the PD-1 development, et cetera. But, you know, my years at Genentech in the 90s, early 90s, we did a lot of work with Ellen, and obviously she's a legend in the space and has done so much. Given my work, I can relate to it. But your agency world work, how did that shape how you think about storytelling in healthcare, and how to get, rather than stumble upon it and have someone from listserv reach out to you, how do we end up in these places where we're actually getting the word out and inviting it in?
I think understanding how authenticity, honesty, trust is a better use of sort of compelling narrative to sway interests. Cancer and healthcare is not a demand market, so you can't really think about it as a consumer strategy. So my approach was the cue I took from Livestrong, which was a very egalitarian way to give people permission to belong somewhere that they never expected to be a part of. Like the club you never asked to join, but it's fun. Come join us. We're sorry you're here. It was a level of brand empathy I had not seen at the time, because everything back then was very agendized and siloed, and fundraisers and 3 days and ribbons and wristbands and pink blenders and all that crap. And Phil Knight did a great job giving Lance the money to build the brand. Lance the man is a separate conversation, of course, but I'm a staunch defender of the Livestrong brand as a teachable experience coming out of the agency world.
You were involved working there, or as an agency, you worked on the brand?
I had severed most of my consulting work and went full volunteer for them. But they had launched something very, very compelling, the first incubator in advocacy called the Livestrong Young Adult Alliance. Tons of data were starting to come out about the long-term effects of cancer on younger people, on long-term pediatrics, and that survival rates were finally starting to improve amongst every age group except the under 40 crowd. So it was really a health disparity reckoning that came out of serious data from COG, SWOG, SEER, NCI, CDC, NIH. And it was a reckoning for AYAs, adolescent young adults, which were not words you said back then, to create a sort of a patient rights movement. So out of the Livestrong Alliance, which I was a part of for 3 years, came what I feel is my legacy, that being Stupid Cancer.
Right. So you launched one of the original podcasts. What was the early podcast world like? There weren't many on this topic, I know. So
yeah, someone put a mic in front of me in 2007 and said, talk. There was a nonprofit group called Vital Options at the same time, run by a woman named Selma Schimmel, who herself was a young adult cancer survivor from the 80s. And she hosted the world's first terrestrial radio program in oncology called The Group Room. And she would schlep like Howard Stern level PLJ equipment from ASCO to ESMO to ASH and record interviews with people there and give out CDs afterwards. And her nonprofit was offered the opportunity to take her AM show onto the, I'm doing air quotes, the internet, right? And she's like, we don't want to do this. You do this. So she basically handed the relationship to this digital streaming blog radio thing, post.com explosion, to me, and said, go run with this. It's yours. As a public radio nerd, and I did college radio, I just had the chance to program a 90-minute show that was live, like no, like if you missed it, you're done. Over like 56K dial up and DSL. And there was nothing there. I mean, there were no talk shows. There were no TV shows. And you don't know you're first because you just kind of show up. But on May 28th, 2007, episode 1 of the Stupid Cancer Show went live, and we had like 17,000 streams. I would contend that because we were first to exist, these were stories that had never been told before to the mass market, to the bubble of healthcare. So every single Monday for an hour and a half was just raw and new because we were just like macheteing through a jungle and building the dirt path for the next people.
What was your intention when you launched Out of Patience?
Well, I had stepped down from Stupid Cancer in 2019, and I made arrangements with my successors and the board that instead of keeping the Stupid Cancer Show, I would honor its legacy by launching a new show in its honor called Out of Patience in 2019. So I took a 1-year hiatus, and then all the Stupid Cancer listeners became listeners of the new show. At the end of the day, there were 4.8 million streams across 400 episodes. So it was a decent amount. And, we had celebrities on, and those would spike, and we had politicians on or, notable people on. But every single show is based on one particular young adult cancer story. And then we built the news around that. We built PR around that. We built a specific topic for the day on that. But there was the Wild West, Jim. We didn't know what we were doing.
Well, it still is. I'm in the West. I find this wild that I'm doing this. But what's happened with Out of Patience since then?
Well, when I relaunched it, I wasn't quite sure what the tone was going to be. I was very heavily siloed in the mission of Stupid Cancer to keep the content as relevant as possible to what we were accomplishing as a nonprofit enterprise. Who am I outside of Stupid Cancer? What is my personal brand outside of that? It really is to be like the intentionally angry, like George Costanza's dad meets Lewis Black meets Mark Maron, of callous disdain for an establishment that profits off of horror. Maybe like a little bit Ralph Nader in the 60s, consumer protection advocate, revealer of secrets, outspoken whistleblower kind of idea behind this. So the guests would span way outside of oncology sometimes, but my guilty pleasure, episode 3, I don't know how he found me. I don't know where it happened, but as a music major who studied all sorts of genres and worshipped at the altars of new age musicians like Yanni and Enya and David Lanz, John Tesh showed up and said, I'd like to be on your show.
That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah, he's great.
I saw him at Red Rocks in the 90s. So having John Tesh show up at episode 3 catapulted my show into the stratosphere.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Like nowhere. So from there, it started to attract lots of bookers and agents that want to have people on the show. But the most memorable ones are the ones you don't plan for and the ones that are wholly unscripted.
So what's your mission getting up today? What do you hope to accomplish in the next 5-10 years?
Well, I can reveal on your show that this has been stealth for a while, and I know no one else is doing it, so I can mention this now, is if there's one thing I learned from Ellen, and you mentioned the Genentech breast cancer sit-ins for Herceptin. I was very privileged, the March on Washington. I'll put a plug in as a precursor, a prelude to my answer, is during the pandemic, I had the chance to produce a documentary series on Spotify, which was a 50-year history of cancer patient rights movements, starting with Mary Lasker and the War on Cancer and the Nixon Cancer Act, all the way down to Ellen Stovall, the Young Adult Cancer Movement, Stand Up to Cancer, DEI. And it really informed me again on what I think the country's been missing, which is we're overdue for another cancer patient rights movement. There's been too much systemic change, too many ways to beat around the system and create loopholes that harm people, and not enough real resistance in the streets anymore. And I'm not talking Occupy Wall Street or, whatever. I feel like we are in a different place now for legislative reform at the state level in the form of consumer protection laws. Advocacy is great. Access is great. Lobbying is great. C4 stuff is great. But I'm going to launch the country's first cancer PAC. And it's called We the Patients. And it will be live in September. If anyone's listening whose eyebrows just raised up, I'm happy to talk to you about what we're planning under cover of night. But I found my next purpose. I found my next stupid cancer.
Well, that's great. It sounds really cool. And I know in my experience, as I went through this with my wife, and diagnosis was a big issue. And we went round and round and round on misdiagnosis and non-diagnosis. And, while that happened, Rome was burning right in her abdomen. I think that's a really common story. I hear it over and over. I've had podcast guests who've talked about this point. The bottom line, if you don't prevent it, we ain't going to cure it. You got, frankly, probably a little lucky relative to the average person, and that must give you all this purpose. But isn't it about prevention and early detection? And it starts with those rights there. Then afterwards, of course, there's all kinds of other implications. But I'm just curious to see what you're going to do here.
I don't think it's an either or.
No,
we
need
definitely
both.
need to have, try to not get it, which is there. But once you're in it, who's protecting you from going bankrupt and being told no and forcing your doctors to do the wrong things and breaking Hippocrates and causing suicide in medicine? So it's both at the same time. I would contend that still as an advocate for young adult cancer, there is no prevention. There is no risk reduction. Maybe self-exams if you're willing to be taken seriously by a general practitioner, but the trends are out. All the work we did has been stellar. The strategic plans at Livestrong were all enacted. Everything we wanted to have happen happened, but we can't control an increase in the population science data of colorectal and pancreatic cancer in young adults. I have no doubt that it's environmental, but you can't prevent environmental factors. Your telomeres are not going to rebel against you when your epigenetics are fighting against your inner white cell manifestos. So what can we do for the populations that are most vulnerable under the age of 40, 45, where these tests aren't available? Genomic tests are great, but you're still at the mercy of likely your employer benefits because you're not on Medicare or Medicaid. So that'll always be an issue, the young adult cancer and the long-term pediatric cancer situation. I'm all for genetic testing as a risk reduction factor, but do people really want to know their risk is a whole other podcast we can have.
In and around the concept of empathy, why does empathy continue to be a missing piece in healthcare comms? Like you said, people don't want to know their risk, but everybody's going to get hit by the bouncing ball.
Well, there's no short answer to why empathy is lacking in healthcare comms, except I could put two words out there, which is complacency and compliance, which is the death of humanity in all comms. Is it has to be sterile, stripped, de-risked, and depersonalized. You can say these words over and over again. Stop putting happy people in cancer ads. I feel like I want to punch something, maybe not hard enough to break my fist, but every time a pharma ad comes on and you're seeing dancing people with rheumatoid, moderate to severe, dying tomorrow syndrome, and your side effects are dying tomorrow anyway. How are we the only country on the planet, I think New Zealand maybe, that's allowed to spend $26.2 billion a year on TV ads and radio and print and digital? That should be banned tomorrow.
Now, obviously, I started a firm focused in communication and social and digital, but not pure play advertising. And it's not that we don't have that. We don't really tend to do that as much. But I think there is a way through what we're doing, frankly, and more of that, more just real people, real stories. Like you said, it's all whittled down to the most vanilla communication when, as you and I both know, it's raw, it's debilitating, going through chemotherapy. any therapy, frankly, there is a level of difficulty that's pretty intense. The irony is some of the things we want could happen and some of the things we don't want could happen.
Exactly.
So where are we left? Survivorship and all the things we want to advance. How are you thinking? Obviously, you're launching the pack for that reason, but where do people go now?
Well, if I put my creative hat on or my former nonprofit hat on, what makes up for the death of empathy and top down is grassroots up. And some of the nonprofits are not really made or built to be media properties. Their job is to do X, Y, and Z. I ran Stupid Cancer very much like an agency. It was a very well branded ecosystem with brand promises and all the usual things you would put together in a sort of brand planning docket for a client. So when we worked with industry, we're not reliant on the dwindling advocacy budgets that come downstream from marketing. We work with marketing, but they allowed us to be the empathetic voice of the campaigns instead. And we're one of the few nonprofits that actually helped get a drug to market through approval processes from phase 3 to implementation because they let us be us. So it is possible to have the nonprofits working on the behalf of the dearth of empathy that comes from top down to get the right messaging to the right consumers to make good decisions. We're not here to endorse a particular drug, but like you said, the stories are what really motivates people. Patients don't want to be marketed to, they want to be spoken with. And I think that could possibly be the one big hurdle that still exists.
So we're not meeting the needs of patients and providers when it comes to sort of the mental health, the burnout, the emotional toll of care, because we're talking at them, not really with them.
Well, medicine's about curing what's wrong with you, not helping you heal.
What advocacy groups are doing it right in your mind?
And I know all the 70, 80, 90 groups that are all out there. And 80% of them are mom and pops. And they're just trying to do their jobs, like the rare disease universe.
Right.
I would argue 15% of the remainder, did I do math right? Yeah, are too big. They're too big. They've been around too long. They haven't adapted. They're just modicums. And the remaining 5% are kind of the nimble ones. They're in the middle, the Goldilocks zone of ones that can work really, really effectively with pharma, with biotech, with life science, with startups. It really is like, what's your goal? I feel like I'm the nonprofit whisperer trying to answer your question here. I could be the arbiter who works for what campaigns, but it's the nimble ones. They're not too big. They're not too small. There's a very, very small Goldilocks zone of cancer groups that are ready, willing, and able to do the job.
I do think the podcast, the internet, all of that has helped free people to find support and solutions. And I think I'm more optimistic than not. But ultimately, we said before, stay out of it, detect it early. That's your best bet. But what would it look like to you if the system treated cancer patients as consumers? We talk about psychographic profiles. We learned a lot in what we did, like any other market segment. I always talk about what if we could make healthcare advertising and marketing as cool as it would be for sneakers. And I do think pharma, I have heard this, many of them want to act more like consumer products companies. Would that help the situation?
No. And here's why. And I've been adamant about this because I used to use a term called consumer oncology, which is now like basically concierge medicine to help you get unscrewed when things happen, is that in consumer, you're building a demand market for a product people don't know they need. And illness is not a demand market. It's a supply market, and no one wants to be shopping in that store. You're not supposed to know what to do when you enter the sick store because you don't go to Cancer University to get sick one day. You can research the latest car buying guides to get the car you want, and they will make sure they'll do anything in their power to sell you the car you want. But in healthcare, at least in this country, you are not the consumer. You are not the end user. You are a byproduct of other transactionals that happen outside your realm. And you are ultimately victimized to make a decision that someone else has to make for you, despite how much self-advocacy you can muster, walking around Hades with a jacket on that you can't take off.
What would a true consumer-driven oncology system look like?
Guaranteed navigation, consumer protections, banning bankruptcy, banning prior authorization, and making sure your doctor doesn't want to kill themselves.
Right. I mean, that's probably true because that's one of the things we face too, their burnout and their frustration. And I think that's only getting more intense.
Yes, it is.
If you could change cancer care from the ground up, what's the first thing you'd focus on? What's the PAC going to focus on?
Basically, banning bankruptcy, guaranteeing navigation services from a third party issued by the state, like a DA, and ensuring and enshrining Hippocrates so there's no burnout in medicine.
You think AI can help that? Probably can, navigation-wise.
I don't know if your audience is following Dr. Elizabeth Potter. She's become a famous celebrity surgeon now for United Healthcare, calling them out for all their bullshit. She just put up something today that she had to do like a flap on a breast cancer patient, and she was asked to do peer-to-peer with United because they wouldn't approve an overnight stay, which you clearly need for this type of surgery. And the peer that she spoke to was neither a surgeon nor an oncologist, more like a medical intern, who had somehow authority over what she thinks is best for her patient, with that person having zero medical understanding of the procedure at hand. It should be illegal for a health insurer to do peer-to-peer without having the peer actually be a peer. Period. That's one example of a protection. And if that peer isn't even licensed in that state to follow those states' laws, they should also be banned from doing that. That is protecting the patient. And yes, we want to empower the doctors to make the most informed decisions Hippocratically for what's best for their patients, all for the right amount of regulated oversight. But now they're just causing harm, and that is unacceptable.
All right. Well, I don't have anything to add to that. I think you answered that great. I want to ask, I always ask my guests two things, and I'm going to be excited because you're a real music guy. I'll start with the first one and we'll go to the second one because you already mentioned guilty pleasures. But what's your desert island album? You know, if you're cast and lost in a desert island, what would be the album you'd bring?
Billy Joel Glass Houses.
Okay. Straight up. I'm going to go listen to that this weekend. My wife loved Billy Joel. That's awesome. I hadn't heard that one yet, but that's a good one. Guilty pleasure. What is it?
Marshmallow Fluff.
I may go look for that this weekend too. See, this is why I ask, so that I have more guilty pleasures. I can't really, we could obviously go on for hours, Matt. We'll do more. This was so awesome. I'm so glad I got to meet you. I can't believe we haven't hung out. Even the Ellen Stovall thing really,
that codified it, Jim. We have to have dinner when you're in New York next time.
Right. And I do get there. Thanks for spending some time with me. I really appreciate it. I know our listeners will. They're going to learn a lot. We'll stay in touch and do more. Thanks.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you so very much. And just a quick plug for my documentary, The Cancer Mavericks.
Yes, please.
I would encourage everyone to have a listen to it. It's cancermavericks.com. Nice and easy. Have a listen. It's an 8-part Spotify series. Ken Burns endorsed on the 50-year history of cancer patient rights movements in America.
Terrific. Yeah, we'll promote that. Sounds awesome. Thanks again.
Jim, take care.
You too, man. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining me on the Get Real podcast. I hope you feel a little healthier hanging out with me. It's going to be a lot of fun passing this along to others. Please subscribe below. Please share. I'm excited not just to talk about healthcare, but a lot of other fun topics. It's about making healthy talk about healthcare. It's not a lecture. This is supposed to be fun, and look forward to spending more time with you in the future.